Close your eyes and picture the stage, the greatest one football has ever built. A summer night, a stadium humming with 100,000 voices, 5 billion people watching from the other side of the planet. The whole world for a few weeks agreeing to care about the same thing at the same time. Now imagine you are the best in the world at that one thing, the most gifted player of your generation. And you spend your whole life knowing that this stage, the only one that truly counts, will open its gates a dozen times while you are alive, and not once will it open them for you. This is the cruelest story in football, not the men who lost finals, the men who were never allowed to play one, the greatest players who never set foot at a World Cup. This is the story of the dream that never came. We begin in Belfast, a boy with a footballer's body and a dancer's balance, who could beat a man twice and then go back and beat him a third time just to be sure. George Best, European Footballer of the Year at 22, a player so far ahead of his time that grown men paid money simply to watch him train. But Best was born in Northern Ireland, a country of barely 1.5 million people. And in the years his genius burned brightest, the late 60s and early 70s, his nation could never quite reach the World Cup. He had the talent of a champion and the passport of a minnow. There was no qualification draw kind enough, no group soft enough to carry him there. The bitterest part came at the very end. In 1982, Northern Ireland finally qualified for Spain. But by then Best was 36, his career all but over, winding down in the American leagues. The manager chose youth, a 17-year-old debutant over a fading legend. And so the World Cup and George Best passed each other on the road, going opposite directions and never met. The greatest dribbler Britain ever produced watched it on television, like the rest of us. If Best was undone by the size of his country, our next man was undone by something far harder to forgive. His own brilliance was never the problem. The problem was that the world he belonged to had no room for him. George Weah, Liberia, the first and still the only African to be named the best player on earth, the Ballon d'Or 1995, a striker so complete he could carry the ball the length of a pitch and finish as if it were nothing. But Liberia was a tiny nation being torn apart by civil war. They had no money, no infrastructure, barely a functioning federation. So Weah did something no superstar before or since has done. He paid for it himself. He bought the kits, he covered the flights, he paid the players' bonuses out of his own pocket. For a stretch, he was captain, financier, and effectively the coach of his own national team. All at once, a man trying to drag an entire country to the World Cup by sheer force of will and his own bank balance. In the qualifiers for 2002, they came within a single point. 1 point. Imagine being the finest player in the world, spending your own fortune, and missing the dream you were buying by the width of a coin. Weah never played at a World Cup. He would later become the president of his country. But the one trophy he wanted, football's grandest stage, stayed forever out of reach. Now cross the sea to a small, proud nation of valleys and song. Wales, and 2 men who gave it everything and got the same nothing in return. Ryan Giggs played for nearly 2 decades at the very top of the European game. 13 league titles. A left foot that seemed to bend the laws of physics. He won every prize club football could offer him. And he retired having never appeared at a single major international tournament because in all his years in red, Wales could not break a drought that stretched back to 1958, the year before he was even born. 64 years. That was how long Wales waited between World Cups. Giggs lived almost his entire career inside that wait, and when it finally ended, he had been retired for nearly a decade. He watched his country march out at last, without him, and he was not alone in that heartbreak. Before Giggs, there was Ian Rush, Wales' greatest goalscorer, a striker who terrorized the best defenses in Europe, who scored goals in his sleep for Liverpool. Same red shirt, same cruel timing, same empty space where a World Cup should have been. 2 of the finest players these islands ever produced, born under the same unlucky star in the same small country that could never quite get there. Some men were kept out by their country, the next was kept out by himself. Bernd Schuster, West Germany, a blonde, brilliant midfielder, gliding through the early 80s as one of the most gifted passers in the world. He should have been at the heart of the German machine for a decade. He should have lifted the trophy in 1990 with the rest of them. Instead, at just 24, he walked away from his national team. The relationship had soured, rose with the federation, with coaches, with teammates. The breaking point, by his own account, came when he refused to fly out for a match so that he could be present for the birth of his child. The fallout was brutal, and he never went back. So while West Germany reached final after final, Schuster played his football in Spain, beautiful, defiant, and entirely absent from the only stage that would have made him immortal. The great German team of that era won a World Cup without one of the most talented Germans of the age. He gave it up. And in the quiet years afterward, he admitted the regret of it, blaming his own stubborn youth. Stubbornness, of a different kind, defines our next man too. Éric Cantona, France. The collar turned up, the chest out, the swagger of a man who believed entirely in himself. A footballer of rare imagination who would go on to define an entire era of English football. And yet, when France assembled the golden generation that would conquer the world in 1998, Cantona was not among them. His international career ended in early 1995. Then came the moment that overshadowed everything. A moment of violence in the stands, a long ban, and by the time it was over, his place in the France team had been taken by a younger man named Zidane. Cantona retired from the game before he turned 31. The next summer, France lifted the World Cup on home soil. He was not there. The king, as they called him, was watching from his throne in exile. But of all the men who never played, perhaps none came closer, in more heartbreaking ways, than this one, Alfredo Di Stéfano. Argentine by birth, the man many who saw him swear was the greatest player who ever lived. He bent 3 different countries to his brilliance: Argentina, Colombia, and finally Spain. 5 European Cups, a complete footballer before the world had a word for it. And the World Cup taunted him at every turn. When Argentina could have taken him, they withdrew from the tournament entirely, twice. By the time he had Spain, and Spain had qualified for 1962, his body finally betrayed him. He travelled all the way to Chile, he sat on the bench, and an injury meant he never came on. He was, agonizingly, a World Cup squad member who never played a single World Cup minute. He got closer than almost anyone, close enough to touch it, to wear the shirt, to sit beside the pitch, and the dream still slipped between his fingers. There is one more name, and his story is not about bad luck, or bad temper, or a small country. It is simply about what was taken. Duncan Edwards, England. A teenager built like a man who played as if he had been born knowing the game. The youngest England international of his era. Those who shared a pitch with him said without hesitation that he was the finest of them all, and that with him, England might have won the World Cups of 1958 and beyond. He never got the chance. On a snowy runway in Munich, in February 1958, the aeroplane carrying Manchester United home crashed on its 3rd attempt to take off. Duncan Edwards survived the impact. He fought for 15 days in a German hospital. And then, at just 21 years old, the boy who might have been the greatest of all simply ran out of time. He never played a World Cup. He barely got to begin. And of all our stories, his is the one we tell most softly. Because his was not a dream deferred. It was a life cut short and a question that can never be answered. So this is the gallery. Best kept small by a small nation. Weah, who tried to buy the dream and missed by a point. Giggs and Rush, lost in the long Welsh wait. Schuster, who walked away. Cantona, exiled. Di Stéfano, who touched it and was denied. And Edwards, who was simply gone too soon. 8 of the finest who ever lived. Not one of them ever ran out onto that stage when it mattered most. And that is the strange, aching truth at the heart of this beautiful game. The World Cup does not promise itself to the greatest. It is not a reward for talent. It is a gift of timing and luck, and 1,000 things outside any single man's control. Some of the very best were never invited to the party at all. So the next time you watch a player walk out under those floodlights, into that wall of sound, remember the ones who never could. Remember that simply being there is its own kind of miracle. Subscribe, and we'll keep bringing you these stories.